Hi everyone, PJ Dudek here. This is my third in a row weekly update video, and today I'm going to be bringing you a review of the Licanius series, which I just finished up last night, staying up way past my bedtime in order to wrap up the final book. Now, before I jump into that review, I did want to say that my book, which is called Earth's Door, it's part of a new series, the Song of Immaru, book one, is on discount through the month of February. So priced it down from $9.99 to $1.99 in February. So if you'd like to snag a digital copy, check out the links below. And yeah, hope you pick it up and hope you enjoy it. So on to the book review. But before I kick that off, I did want to say I don't intend to turn this into a booktube channel. And if you don't know what a booktube channel is, it is, as perhaps you can imagine, devoted to book reviews. I can't read that many books a year, again, just because of lots of conflicting things. I have, the day job and then writing my own series. But I am trying to at least have something I'm reading ongoing because I want to get a sense, for instance, like with the Licanius Trilogy, what modern fantasy and more modern books in my genre look like. So I could get to know the audience better, what's popular, what's not. And again, I don't want that to completely influence my writing, but it's useful because I grew up on old school stuff like Lord of the Rings and Narnia. And again, it's helpful to see what's been written the last 20 years looks like. Now, the Licanius series by James Islington is a 3-book series, and it is massive. So the last book that I wrapped up, book 3 in the series, is The Light of All That Falls, and it is huge. How many pages is this roughly? Like over 800 pages, and the books 1 and 2 aren't that much smaller. You can see the whole thing here. It's just massive. These are called like doorstop fantasy, I guess. So the fact that it took me over a year, I think that's reasonable. Just for a little bit of a comparison, Lord of the Rings, which I have a copy of here, is 480,000 words. And you can see that's about as big as one of the Licanius series books. The Licanius series is 760K words, so there's about 1.5 Lord of the Rings match the Licanius series. So my thoughts on the Licanius series, overall, I enjoyed it. I think it's objectively a good book. And when I say objectively good, what I mean is there's no major writing errors, tons of grammatical problems, the flow and everything is good. The story, makes sense. It's extremely complex, and I'll get into that in a minute, but it makes sense. And in terms of the audience, generally very, very well received. So again, objectively good. I definitely think, reading is an incredibly subjective experience. So I'll share some things that, worked for me, some things that didn't work quite as well. So my biggest gripe about the book actually has nothing to do with the writing. It's about the map, not that the map is bad, and I'll show it to you here. I mean, it actually looks pretty cool, and it's one of the reasons I was interested in picking up the book. It's a pretty nice map. I'll be able to follow along, and there's a lot described in the story that maps back to the map, but there's also a considerable amount that doesn't. So it made it challenging for me to kind of follow along where the characters were, and I really like doing that. And that's something that made the Lord of the Rings so fantastic to me, is I can kind of trace where they're going, and it obviously has a really famous map. So, but yeah, the map definitely I think could have a little bit more detail, but that's not anything that was a major hang up. And jumping into the story itself, one thing that I really, really liked about it was sort of the theme of friendship and forgiveness that was involved. There's characters that are, trying to figure out really what is right and wrong in this world. And there is another thing I like. There is kind of this objective good and evil, but the gray area in between is very challenging for the characters to overcome. And part of that is the fact that fate is a huge element of the book. So people in this world can know what's going to inevitably happen to them, and then they have to decide how their decisions day by day, really matter and can still be good or bad as they're moving towards that inevitable fate. The next thing that I'd say about this book that it leaned heavily into was really focusing on just what was necessary for the characters, understanding their motivation and just kind of keeping things moving. So you'd see instances where some really bad stuff would happen, like, there'd be some deaths and the characters would be like, oh no, this is terrible. We'll mourn later. Let's get on with it. And that happened multiple times, and it's fine. It keeps the plot moving, but it didn't really give a lot of breathing room to be like, oh wow, this character, these group of people, they're no longer here with us. What does that mean? It's like, no, we got to go off and do this next thing. So nothing wrong with it. It just for me, I'd like to have a little more time, to like mourn when certain bad or sad things happen. Another thing in this book that I noticed that's a lot different than Lord of the Rings. And again, Lord of the Rings, just to be clear, is sort of the epitome of fiction to me. So it's impossible for me not to compare anything I read now to Lord of the Rings. But one thing Lord of the Rings does that I personally really like is the setting description. He goes into a lot of detail in terms of like, describing trees and the leaves and blah, 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 mountains. I really like that because for me, it helped me really feel immersed in this story, and it made Middle Earth feel a lot more real. In the Licanius Trilogy, that's not the case. Again, the focus is really, I'd say, on like plot and characters. Things are moving really quick, so I kind of always had a fuzzy sense of where people were at, like the different cities and the mountains and so forth, but never really that deep, more visceral feeling that I got with Lord of the Rings. I think some people probably would love that if you don't want all those details. But again, for me, it was fine. But something I like better in other books. I'd say the biggest thing I really liked in this book, which was consistent again, and I mentioned this earlier, was a theme of friendship. So you got a primary cast of about 4 characters, and you're jumping between them, getting their point of view from time to time, and you really get to know them well. And just how they navigate challenges and so forth, I thought was pretty admirable, and I liked it. I really liked it. It was a little more classic in terms of who's kind of good and who's bad and why. And of course, there were some gray areas and whatnot, but ultimately seeing the good side of people in this book, I thought was really refreshing. It'd be impossible for me not to talk a little bit about just the length of the books. I do think that it could have been trimmed down. I would have enjoyed it a little bit more if some segments had been trimmed down. There's just a lot of book there, and sometimes I think there were places the plot could have been tightened up. But again, other people might really, really enjoy that and get some of that additional detail. One thing with modern fantasy that's pretty popular, I can tell through this book, and just with what's out there now, like with Brandon Sanderson and so forth, is like this hard magic system. And what that is it's really more like there's a science behind the magic. So if this, then this. And in these modern fantasy books, there's just so much detail poured into that, and frankly, it's not my cup of tea. I also don't want a magic system to be so soft that like, hey, the big protagonist comes up against the major antagonist, and they have some new thing, and then poof, they knock out the antagonist. I mean, that's pretty boring too. So, but my preference is a little bit more of a blend in the middle, and a lot of the length of all the modern fantasy books that I've read so far. I've also read Mistborn. It's a good book. I'm not going to do a review on it. It's so many people have done reviews on that. But yeah, there's so much focus on that. It takes a lot of word count, and for me, that slows things down. That being said, though, it's super popular. A lot of people love it. So if that's something you enjoy, it's definitely in this book. I'd like to get to the shining achievement of this book, and that's actually what I experienced last night. Just one of the best endings that I've read in a book ever. I rarely feel any sort of emotion anymore if I'm doing reading and even watching like movies. It just, I don't know. I'm getting older. I'm just losing. It's just harder for me to like feel when I'm watching a movie or reading a book. But this one actually was really interesting. How James Islington stuck the landing, and it got really philosophical and dove deep into that whole notion of fate. And I'm not going to go into any spoilers, but what I hear from a lot of people and what happened for me as well is you really, uh, you, you just keep thinking about it. And yeah, so definitely stuck the landing on that one. And I think that's super important because when you've gone through a series of this size, if the ending's good, then it really makes everything that's gone before it, the things you liked, even the things that maybe you didn't like as much, worth it. And for me, I definitely loved the ending, and because of that, I think this is a really good series, and I'm glad that I read it. All right, so that wraps up my book review of the Licanius Trilogy by James Islington. Definitely recommend for someone who wants to get a taste of more modern fantasy and you like some of the things I described in terms of themes of friendship and kind of having some classic good versus evil stuff going on, um, as well as just a story that's huge, but lets you really get immersed into it. If you'd like to see a more professional review of this book, there's a YouTube channel that I enjoy called Two to Ramble, and they do a really good job diving deep into this. They have kind of their own rating system and so forth. So highly entertaining. Definitely recommend it. I'll leave a link somewhere here that you can check it out. Anyway, that wraps things up for this week. Hope you have a great week, and until next time, bye bye.